Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor. And welcome to the last day of July. This is it. No more July after today. Moving into August, which is going to be filled with trashy books for me because I'm taking part in Garbogust, Criminali's reading event, celebrating trashy books. But let us go back and talk about the books I read in July. I read some interesting books in July, actually. I've talked about a couple of them already, so I will not go on at length, particularly with this one, Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. I started this at the end of June for June on the Range. The last couple days of June, I started this book, Lonesome Dove. It's a very long book. What is it, 800 and something pages? It's long. But epic and great. This is a great book, as I've mentioned before. The more I think about it, the better it seems. I really like this book, Lonesome Dove. I will read the other books in the Lonesome Dove series. I hear they're not as good, but how could they be? Really, this was just so damn good. And tragic. This was a lot more tragic than I figured it would be. There's a lot of violence and death in this book, actually. More violence and death than in some horror novels you'll come across. But so well done. Just so well done, this book. It's majestic. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Now I'm going to have to watch that miniseries because I never saw that. And so now I'm curious. I'll have to watch that now. Anyway, Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry. I did a whole video on it. It was epic. And I followed that with this, Stephen King's Christine. I did a video on this too. I do lots of videos. Anyway, Stephen King's Christine, about a killer supernatural car which drives on its own and slaughters people. There's more to it than that. But this is not considered one of Stephen King's best. I think this is considered kind of the middle of the road as far as quality goes for Stephen King. I liked it a bit better than that, actually. I liked this book a lot. I think there are a lot of good things about this book. There is some stuff in here that's not so hot, but it's a creature features story. It's a monster story. The monster being a 1958 Plymouth Fury. And it was interesting to read this because the story takes place in 1978 and 79. The book came out in 1983. And in those times, if you turned on the oldies station on the radio, you'd get 1950s music, which plays a big part in this story. Christine, the supernatural car, the radio would always go straight to the oldie station. And so there would always be old rock and roll playing whenever Christine was out, killing people or just driving around. And there's actually a pretty interesting playlist. If you put together all the songs that are mentioned in this book, you get actually a pretty good collection of 1950s rock and roll songs. And I remember those days, back when you turned on the oldie station and you'd get 1950s rock and roll. Those days are long past. I don't know if there's any radio stations now that play 1950s rock and roll. Not in the Bay Area, anyway. Now, if you turn on the oldie station, you get music from the time that this was written, and a little later, actually. So, I'm old. So yeah, Christine, Stephen King. I highly recommend it if you like this sort of thing. And here's more of that sort of thing, because after that, I read another horror novel from the 80s. This one's from 1986. This is The Light at the End by John Skipp and Craig Spector, which is a vampire novel from 1986. John Skipp and Craig Spector, they were at the forefront of the splatterpunk movement. So as you can imagine, this book is very violent. I'm going to be talking about this vampire novel in the near future on somebody else's channel. I'll let you know where that is when the time comes. But yeah, The Light at the End. It's very much a book of its time. It has a lot of reading this back, I first read this in the early 90s, only a few years after it was written. And so it was very contemporary at the time. But looking back on it now, reading it now, it feels so much like the 1980s, this book. and some of the darker aspects of the 1980s and the things that scared people in the 80s and that we were anxious about in the 1980s. Crime, urban decay, that kind of stuff. A lot of that in this rather creepy vampire novel. This is actually a lot of fun. The light at the end, I recommend it. It's cool. So I read that. And then I read a comic book. I read this. This is Ghost Rider Epic Collection, Hell on Wheels. This is the first Ghost Rider Epic Collection. I read this because of Garb August. I'm going to do a series of Epic Comic Book Wednesdays on trashy Marvel comics. This is a trashy Marvel comic, man. It's a lot of fun. It's about Johnny Blaze, who becomes the Ghost Rider because Satan turns him into Ghost Rider. Now, I've since been informed that this is not actually Satan, but they retconned it and it's Mephisto. But Mephisto's disguise was so great. I mean, the costume that he got at the Halloween Spirits store and put on was so great that it really convinced me, and I thought that this was Satan. But it's really Mephisto. That sneaky bastard. Anyway, Ghost Rider. This is going to be a lot of fun to talk about because, man, is this a trashy comic. I love the old schlocky horror comics that Marvel did. That's no secret. And this just has so much of that kind of thing in it. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. Ghost Rider. So yeah, I read that. And I also did something that I never thought I would do. And I read a Goosebumps book. This is The Cry of the Cat by R.L. Stine. Goosebumps. This was actually very kindly sent to me by Juan at Plagued by Visions. Fantastic channel, Juan, Plagued by Visions. I'll link it down below. It's wonderful. Everybody knows how great that channel is. And he's a very kind person, Juan. And he sent me this because he knew I had never read a Goosebumps book. Because by the time these started coming out, I was too old and mature. But now I'm senile and, entering my second childhood mentally. So it's perfect. So I picked this up and I didn't intend on reading it. I was just like, oh yeah, I remembered Juan sent me this book. And I turned to the first page, and the first page is the cat opened his jaws in a shrill cry of attack. Gobs of white drool slid down his curled fangs. His yellow eyes glowed like headlamps. So yeah, I had to keep reading, and I just sat down and I read this. It didn't take too long. It's very small, this book, but I enjoyed it. I can see the appeal. I can see the appeal of this now. Now, of course, I have mentioned many times that cats are not scary. You can't, it's almost impossible to make a cat scary, almost. But kind of did in this one, actually. This is great. Goosebumps, a lot of fun. I see why all you kids enjoyed the Goosebumps, because I enjoyed this one. It was fun. So yeah, Goosebumps. Now, I followed that up with something that's possibly even less mature than that. I got a jump on Garb August. I decided to read my first Garb August book in the last couple days of July, so I read this. This is Blade #1, First Strike by David Robbins. David Robbins, who wrote and is still writing, I think, men's adventure stuff. He wrote some of the Mac Bolan novels under a pseudonym. But he wrote all kinds of stuff under a lot of different pseudonyms, actually, and his own name. He wrote the long running Wilderness series for Leisure Books. And this is actually a spin-off from his Endworld series. These all take place in a world where there was a nuclear war, but it was decades in the past the nuclear war happened. So now you're in a world that's trying to put itself back together, but there are a bunch of mutants and monsters roaming around. And so Blade is put in charge of a strike force so that he can go and defend the newly emerging society from all threats. Him and his strike force. And this is the first adventure of Blade's strike force, where they go fight a big spider mutant and his children. It's now, as you can see from the cover, it's trashy, and it's gloriously trashy. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this book. It's no masterpiece, but it is exactly what you would expect. I mean, you pick up this book, you expect, you know, kind of like a 1980s action movie with monsters. And that's exactly what you get with this book. It's actually got quite a bit of humor in it. It's fun. This was a fun book. I can see why, you know, people just read tons of these when they were out. This was published by Leisure Books, the home of trashy books. Leisure Books. Leisure. They passed away. But this was fun. Blade, #1, First Strike. It was awesome in its own trashy way. And that was everything, because actually this took up a lot of time for me this month. But yeah, that's everything I read. And now I'm going to be moving into Garbogust and reading a bunch of trash. And I've got some exciting videos coming up. Later in this week, I've got another haul of adventure because Roger can't stop buying books. And I've got a video day after tomorrow, I think. No, wait. Yes, on Tuesday. I've got, what do I got? I've got Algernon Blackwood, the video about Algernon Blackwood's, his work that's in print at the moment. And tomorrow, the main event, Conan versus Tarzan. Who will win this epic battle? Tune in tomorrow to find out. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.